views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where I think you know by now, we talk to journalists and writers and editors and photographers and filmmakers. And sometimes we get into people who do spoken word, anybody who really puts something out in the borough of the Bronx. And this evening, we're going to start off with a very serious dialogue and bring on somebody who very recently has taken over a Bronx beat. And it is Claudia Aponte. Nice to have you with us, Ms. Aponte.
Thanks, Gary. Great to be here.
So you, I'll just say it. Claudia works for the city, and she is now the new Bronx beat reporter for the city. But since this is your first time on the program, let's talk about who you are so people can get an idea of who's writing when they see what you write. So just a little background. Why did you get into journalism and how did you land here in the borough of the BX?
For sure. So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I lived there my entire life. Always been in tune to social justice issues, both on the island and here in New York. And, you know, growing up in an era of kind of like economic upheaval on the island, kind of like, you know, awoke in me a sense of wanting to get involved in journalism and kind of like to understand the world around me. And that's kind of like what I like to bring to the table as a reporter here in New York City. I've lived here for the last 4 years. I went to CUNY, and for the last 2 years, I covered Brooklyn at the city. But starting now in 2021, I am covering the best borough, the Bronx. Very excited to be covering the Bronx right now in this, you know, pivotal moment in history for our city and our borough.
I gotta know. Sorry, we ask honest questions. Are you patronizing me by saying it's the best borough, or do you really believe that it is the best borough?
I do believe that. I mean, coming as someone, you know, from Puerto Rico, the Sixth Borough, we have a very close connection to the Bronx. I unfortunately do not live in the Bronx, but I live very close by. I spend a lot of time there, both for work and in my personal capacity. I love the Bronx. It has the best people, a lot of the best food, and, you know, tons to offer. Though I am a Mets
What?
fan.
I'm a Mets fan too. Shh. But listen, you're checking off all the boxes there. That's right. You're checking off all the boxes. Last thing before we get serious, we are going to talk about voting and the special elections that are coming up. Why is it that you like to report? What is it that gives you that energy that says, "Hey, this is what I want to do"?
You know, it's for me, it's more than about, you know, giving a voice to the voiceless. I feel that a lot of people in our city, and that is especially true for the Bronx, have a voice. It's just a matter of uplifting them and having their voices heard. I love to have the opportunity to do that as part of my job, explaining to folks how the city is changing around them and giving them the power to, you know, make their own decisions and make their own informed decisions about how to manage their everyday lives in the city, and uplifting the voices of working class New Yorkers. That is always a huge thrill. And I have to say, one of the things that I love about journalism is being able to approach a lot of different topics, you know, without having to be the thing, you know, being able to talk about history, being able to talk about labor, housing, and all these different types of topics that we interact with in our day-to-day life, especially over the last year with, you know, public health, without necessarily having to be an expert, and to get the opportunity to talk to a lot of different people is definitely, you know, a huge privilege for me in this job, and a reason why I love it so
Boy, am I
much.
glad that the city was smart enough to put you in the Bronx. Uh, and I mean that you know, with utmost respect. Let's talk about the special elections coming up. We at BronxNet, and particularly me, because I moderate all the debates, have been counting not only the two special elections coming up, but the very busy spring we're going to have with all the city council races and the mayor's race and the borough president's race. Let's talk about the two special elections coming up. You wrote a piece, everything you need to know about the special elections in the Bronx and Queens. Um, Talk to me about what you learned. What struck you as you began to go through, the details about what's coming up in the 11th and 15th council districts?
For sure, but so for the viewers, I'd like you to start off by saying that kind of like this article is a part of a project that we have at the city called the Civic Newsroom. We have a lot of series of like articles and explainers, just kind of like walking through readers on the 1, 2, 3s of this year's massive election cycle here in New York City. Who's running for mayor and why, who's running for city council, comptroller, what does the comptroller do? And one of the articles was about the special elections that we have this year, this spring actually, in the Bronx and in Queens. So in the Bronx, we have 2 special elections coming up on March 23rd. One's in District 11, which is roughly, the neighborhoods of Wakefield, Riverdale, and Norwood. And in District 15, the council district previously occupied by now Congressman Richie Torres. And these special elections are coming up because the council members who presided over these districts left their terms early. So what we have to, this is Andy Cohen, of course, in District 11, and again, Richie Torres in District 15. And so what happens when an elected official leaves their term before that term is due is voters have to pick someone to fill in their place for the interim until their term is supposed to end. So in this year, this means that for residents of both of these districts have to vote 3 times in the special election on March 23rd, on the Democratic primary in June, where they will also be voting for their candidates for mayor, comptroller, borough president, etc. I think that about covers it. And again, in the general election in November. So that's a lot of elections to keep track of if you're a resident of District 11 and 15.
One of the things that characterizes not only the special election, but I think we're in for it during the primary season, is the numbers of candidates. A special election allows, I don't want to say just anybody to run, but in essence, if you can get the signatures and get yourself on the ballot and play by the rules, you can run. In the 11th council district, there were 5. There's now a 6th. A guy named Kevin Pasmino has just added himself to the ballot with a submission of signatures. But in the 15th, I'm trying to make sense of it. There are 10 candidates. I don't know how voters can make a choice. While we want to open things up, I wonder if this is a good thing.
Yeah, and another interesting thing about special elections is also candidates don't have to run on traditional party lines. So on the ballot, you won't see, someone running as a Democrat, as a Republican, or an independent, but people create kind of like their own party lines. Like I remember for the 2019 special election for public advocate, after Tish James was elected, for a statewide office, and Jumaane Williams and several others were running for public advocate. There was the Pay Folks More party. There was the there were some party lines that were about the MTA. People get pretty creative with like their party lines, and that could probably make it difficult sometimes for voters to decide how does this candidate's values align with mine. And that's why it's really important to be informed on who's running and all that. But it's important to note that the person who wins a special election is not the person, not generally the person who must remain for the remainder of the term and then onward. Voters again have the opportunity to vote again in June on traditional party lines. That means Democratic or Republican, and then again in the depending on their party affiliation, and then again in the general primary cycle. So while it is likely that the person who wins a special election will probably win the primary and then the general, that isn't necessary.
It's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed.
It's a fact. Just you're mentioning that has me wondering. Gee, I wonder if we could come up with a better way of handling this, because you presented it perfectly. You're asking voters to come out 3 times. And there is activity, especially in the Bronx, a real interest in public participation and voting and all that kind of thing. But it's an interesting thing. In this election, we're making a big deal of it, where BronxNet has already run a debate. I'm going to be moderating a forum in Woodlawn for these same candidates in the 11th, and then we're going to be doing the debates as we get closer in March. And yet, by 3 months later, we're going to be, in essence, doing it again. Strange. Anyway, one other thing that characterizes these elections is this idea of ranked choice voting. So I think a lot of people have heard about it. They know they're supposed to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why don't you just explain what it is and why we're doing it? so people can get an idea.
For sure. So ranked choice voting is kind of like this new experiment in New York City for this election cycle. You know, this is the first year that this has been in effect for a municipal election cycle in New York City. And in essence, you know, whereas in previous elections, voters would only have to pick one candidate out of any list of candidates up for a single elected office, they have the choice to rank up to 5 candidates by their order of preference, you know, as they cast their ballot. And you know, this is and if no one gets a majority, that means if no one gets more than 50% of the vote, then it goes by kind of like a runoff election. So the first big test for ranked choice voting was at the Queens election in last week on February 2nd. I believe it was District 24, but I might be mistaken about that. And there was one candidate that won more than 50% of the vote, so it didn't go in a runoff. But the idea of ranked choice voting is for candidates to not have to like coalesce behind a single candidate, to give, you know, voters an option, you know, to really rank and decide, you know, what candidates really speak to them the most, and kind of like in a way like democratize like the entire process so that not one candidate comes out on top. The idea is to make the election a little bit more competitive and equitable. And it'll be like a real big challenge for voters this year, because not only, especially for you know, voters who live in districts 11 and 15 in the Bronx, not only are we asking them to come out 3 times this year to vote, but also they kind of are the very first in the city to kind of, among the first in the city actually, to test out this new form of voting.
It's you know, if I was complaining, and you'd mentioned it already a couple of times, the whole notion of 3 times coming out to vote, potentially there could be a fourth, right? Or more.
If it goes to a runoff, it's very possible, but we'll see what happens. You know, that didn't happen in Queens for the election last week. You can take your bet whether that'll be a likely scenario in District 11 and 15th. It seems like, you know, there is one candidate in District 11th, and that is Eric Dinowitz, who is kind of like the clear favorite. I feel like the field is a little bit more competitive for District 15th.
You know, I moderate all the political debates, so I never do that favorite thing. You're entitled to do it, and I know a lot of media does, but there are a lot of people who, you know, don't do that. But you never know. I mean,
Yeah, you never know.
and with 10 candidates in the other race, you know, and as I looked at the list, there are many people who are well known in that district. And then we look at what's going to happen in the spring, in June 22nd it is. Anything could happen. I mean, we're talking at Bronxnet about having to moderate debates with, you know, 6, 8, and 10 candidates, practically one every night. You got 8 races going on. Anyway, listen, Claudia Aponte, thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much for being our new person to turn to at the city when it comes to the borough of the Bronx. And you've made a great start. This was an incredibly informative piece that you did. We have to give a shout out to Christine Chung, right? Is that who assisted you with it? And we hope to have you back, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes up. And we really appreciate you being with us this evening.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. Claudia Aponte. And from the city, check it out. Go to the city, and then just go look up her stuff. She's doing great work. And we're going to take a break. We'll switch gears, and we will have somebody who does spoken word, and he's kind of got a lot of energy going now, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So don't go away.